What up guys, Cole here, and this video is actually going to be a podcast interview that I did with Joel Erway. So if you don't know Joel, he's actually one of the top guys when it comes to writing webinars, sales copy, mini webinars, power offers, that's his jam. But he had me on to essentially talk about sales, influence, and also we really focused on scaling to 8 figures and the core tenets to build a sales team. So in this, we talk about when it's the right time to get off the phones if you're a founder and you're trying to get off the phones and scale your sales team. So when is the right time? We also talk about how to actually recruit and where to find the best sales reps. And then when you find them, what the interview process looks like, what the training process looks like, how to actually manage them, and so much more. I also give just a lot of my thoughts that I've learned and just key lessons going from 0 to $2.5 million a month cash revenue for our company. So very, very valuable interview, and we're gonna splice over to that right now.
Hey, what's going on? Joel Erway here, and welcome to another very special episode of Experts Unleashed. And today, you are in for an amazing treat. I've got a very special guest, a very good friend of mine here on the show here today, and we are going to be talking about all things sales. Not just sales, but how my guest here today, Cole Gordon, went from 0 to 30 million per year in recurring annual revenue in just over 2 years, in 26 months. Let me repeat that for you. 0 to $30 million per year in annual revenue in just over 26 months. Now, to give you a little bit of context here, Cole is a sales rock star. Now, not just necessarily like he knows how to close the deal, because there's lots of people out there who can teach sales, who can teach like, okay, here's how you close a deal. But how do you close a deal and do that at scale without breaking any other part of your business? Going from 0 to $30 million per year in our space, in the bootstrapping space, is unheard of. I mean, I can probably count on one hand, probably on 2 fingers, how many people that I have know personally that have done that. So I wanted to bring Cole on here today because we're going to talk about all things related to sales, but how do you scale your sales so it doesn't break your business? Because when you bring on a sales team or a salesperson, doesn't have to be a team, but when you bring on your first rep or your first 5 reps, right, this is going to be one of the more difficult things that you do in your company to grow. And so the reason why I have Cole on here today is because there are some very specific things that everyone needs to be aware of, and I'll be fully transparent. I'm a customer and a client of Cole's, and I highly recommend him. And so I'm going to approach this conversation for all of you who are wondering, what are the key things that I need to think about when I'm looking at growing my sales team? So without further ado, Cole, welcome to the show, my man. It's great to have you here.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me, and happy to break all this down.
So I want to jump right in, right? We've got the big hook. We've laid the hook out there, 0 to $30 million per year in 26 months. We were chatting before this and just doing some brainstorming. And when you launched, you really had an unfair, I don't want to say an unfair advantage because it's your skill set, right? But getting to a level that large is not about just one key thing of like, oh, I've just got a great offer that scales. Like, yes, that's really, really important. Mm-hmm. But I can probably point to 999 people out of 1,000. If they were given your offer, right, and your business, they probably wouldn't have scaled it to the level that you have. So Let's talk about like what allowed you to hit that, hyperbolic growth curve without slowing down. I mean, what happened before you launched that really gave you the skill set to be able to take that momentum and keep it going?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. So as a quick side note, what's really interesting is now that I'm a lot more public about the numbers that we're doing, and part of that is because we launched a mastermind dedicated to getting in $1 million a month. So some of the ads and all this stuff, but neither here nor there. What's funny is I have tons of people now who, and it's not just beginners. It's like people who are a little bit more advanced who are knocking off my offer and trying to compete with me because they think like, oh, it's the sales recruiting offer is how he got to X. And they're not looking at it's actually, as with tons of issues, it's so much more complex of that. It's like, 100 different things. It's this huge skill stack. It's also my team. It's also timing. It's also all of these different, not to mention I was, a salesperson for 5 years, right? Most of these people who are doing this now aren't even salespeople. So anyways, a big thing that really helped me is that basically I was a professional salesperson for years. And as I was doing that, I kind of moved up the ranks and got to the point where I was a sales lead and kind of helping manage the team. And then when I started on my own company, I really didn't have a company. It was me like consulting people, but I was consulting a lot of people in our industry on their sales team. And I was working with sales teams literally every single day. Like I had like 40 to 50 one-on-one clients at one time. I was just spending all day on the phone coaching salespeople. So this is, part of the reason I really built my skill set and built a lot of talent. But also when I went to start my own company and actually really build the systems and kind of build a real company, not just me consulting people one-on-one, I had already mastered the hardest team building skill, which is, I believe, building a high performance sales team, especially one that's 100% commission based. I think it's by far, if you weigh that against marketing, finance, operations, fulfillment, any of these other departments, the sales team is the hardest one. And we run really every single department kind of like it's a sales team, right? In a sense. I mean, there's some similarities there. We definitely recruit, we onboard, train, very, very similar to that. So by mastering that, which was the hardest one first, I think when I had to build a marketing department and then these other departments, it became a lot easier because of that, because the sales team is definitely the hardest. And that's a big reason a lot of clients hire us is because they're having trouble either finding good salespeople or managing their salespeople, et cetera. And so we're not only trying to give them the salespeople, but also download that skill of sales management into their company internally, whether that's the entrepreneur or their sales manager. So I do think having that skill, it's huge in terms of really knowing how to lead a team.
Well, let's just ask the question that's the elephant in the room is why is mastering, building and managing a high performing sales team, like why is that so difficult? Right. I mean, like you obviously had 5 years in the trenches before you went and you started to grow your own business around it. But why is that so? Why do so many people struggle with that?
Yeah. So here's the thing. And you also asked, how did I get to 30 million so quickly? This is also kind of going to answer that question. So I think it's a misalignment in terms of expectations and paradigm and mindset around what scaling actually is. So when you're about 0 to 100K a month, 0 to maybe 200K a month, really all you're trying to do at that point is really innovate a great product, so product market fit, and then a great way to acquire clients from cold traffic that can scale, like a true system, not like some organic social media and a little bit of Facebook group and some email list and like some like launches a couple times a year. It's like, how do you really build a system to where more inputs equal more outputs? Mark Ford calls this in Ready, Fire, Aim the optimal selling system. So that's what I always refer to it as. And so really when you're first starting off, you're trying to find out like, what are you selling? Do you have product market fit? Is the product actually good? And then like, how are you going to sell it in a way where inputs can equal outputs? And there's many different ways you can do that. I can tell you for most of my clients, it's typically either going to be cold outbound sales, which is very, very minority, but some of them. And then the main ones is going to be some sort of way off paid traffic, right? You might have your occasional person who's found like a really scalable way to do affiliates. And look, if you got 1 million YouTube subs in your Graham Stephen or something, okay, sure. Like your optimal selling system can be making one YouTube video and filling sales calendars for a month. But most people aren't like that. And if you have 10 or 20, 30,000 YouTube subs, you're not going to be able to really consistently have that system in place. You're going to have to really create like a system to where inputs equal outputs. So that's the biggest thing. Is 0 to like 200K a month. It just really depends, somewhere in there. You have to figure out those two things. It's like, what are you selling? Product market fit. Is the product good? A lot of innovation there. And then a lot of innovation towards like, how are you going to sell it? And making sure that you're doing something first, right? You can either be the first one in a category or subcategory based on your product market fit, or the first one in a subcategory, a category or subcategory in terms of how you're selling it. For instance, like Michael Dell, when he sold personal computers, he wasn't the first person to sell personal computers, but he was the first person to sell it by telephone. So he was the first on a channel, right? So you need to figure out, so 0 to 200K a month, ton of innovation. And entrepreneurs actually are pretty decent at that. That's not where I think they fall apart. Because your question was, why do people struggle with this so much? The reason they struggle is because once they have those two things, they continue to kind of stay in this entrepreneurial energy and innovation and creativity, when really what you have to do at that point is you got to like buckle down and just manage people. And most entrepreneurs do not want to do that. It's very like unsexy advice, but 200K a month to 1 million a month is really just managing people. And it's this race to essentially scale to build enough cash flow to where you can reinvest back into your business to hire leaders, whether that's on profit share or some sort of bonus structure. I mean, you're gonna have to find the best talent and pay them to start managing these departments for you: marketing, sales, operations, fulfillment, etc. Then you could finally buy your time back. And usually at an multiple eight-figure level, what happens is the business slows down and it ceases to have innovation. And you as the founder or some other leaders in the company have to take a step back and start that entrepreneurial re-innovation energy again. So hopefully that makes sense. But the problem is most entrepreneurs never really double down and learn the skills of leading teams, managing teams, building teams. And I can tell you, from about 250, it's probably about 200 grand a month to 1.5 million a month. All I did was I ran the marketing meeting, the sales meeting. I trained salespeople, hired salespeople. I trained, I didn't necessarily build a finance department, but I was very in sync with the finance department, operations department. I mean, I was coaching my leaders, I was building my leaders. And then eventually around 1.5 million a month, I kind of started to get to this place where I only really needed to be in the marketing department. And now I even have a marketing director since about 3 months ago. So now the only team I have is the executive team. So now what I've spent a lot of my time doing is that re-innovation. Like I literally just wrote four VSLs and new marketing campaigns in like the past 30 days. Just trying to just re-innovate, maybe get a new market segment, see if we can beat our controls, stuff like that, right? Which is fun, but I like everything. Yep. So I think people like the innovation stuff. That's kind of what gets them started. They're entrepreneurial. But this like 200K a month, $1 million a month is this like hardcore management. And They don't like that. See, I had that skill because I had done all the sales team work. And as a salesperson, you kind of get used to this like gritty, like just do the work and don't complain and like take all the rejections. It's just kind of pounding the pavement. So I really built that muscle with sales, and I just that's what really helped us scale so quickly because you have all the innovation you need. But what most people want to do is, they get to 400K a month and they want to launch a new offer, or they want to like do a new funnel, or they want to do a new campaign. We have one funnel, one channel, one ad, like to one offer to get all the way to $1.5 million a month. So I think that's the biggest thing people trip up on.
Yeah. So that's a great, like very macro perspective of like, okay, like depending on what your goal is of the journey of the business that you want to build, like there's a lot of things that, like that's a great vision exercise of like, okay, wow, like that's what it takes. Like if I want to get to, multi-7 or, 8 or multi-8 figures, like, all right, like I got to put myself in the leadership role. But there's a lot of people out there who are still struggling right now. So I want to bring it back a little bit. And, they're struggling at that first stage. Like, okay, cool. Like they got leads coming in, they got appointments. They've probably hired some salespeople in the past and it hasn't worked out. Or maybe they're really struggling to find a good salesperson. Like what do we do in that stage? Like, all right, like I know I've got an offer that works. Like I've got fulfillment, under control, or at least like manageable based on the leads that we've got right now. But I really need to get off the phone. Right? Why do people struggle with that first step of just getting off the phone? Right.
Yeah. Well, why do people struggle? It's because they kind of forget that it's like, if I told you copywriting was a skill, hey man, like your first webinar didn't do so well, but it was the first one you ever wrote. You don't really have the copywriting as a skill yet. You got to you got to put work into this to get good at copywriting so you could write a webinar that's going to convert. If you told that to most people, they'd be like, duh, that makes sense. But what people don't remember or they don't realize is that when you're building this, when you're getting off the phones and building a sales team for the first time, it's a skill. And it's something that's not really, prior to me, I mean, there's maybe one or two other people teaching it. They were kind of just doing recruiting. I was like the first person to really be like, hey, this needs like taught, like packaged in a skill and taught, and we'll give you the recruiting too. So I think they just don't realize it's a skill. They just think it's like finding this unicorn, right? So I think first thing is you need to realize, okay, I'm going to step into building this skill as a sales team manager and building the skill as leading a sales team. And I'm going to stink at it at first, just like I stunk at every other skill that I did, that I'm eventually going to get a lot better. So they first got to realize that. Now, second, a little bit more tactical piece of advice is the same thing with, if I put out an offer in the market and I'm not really getting the prospects that I want, I'm not going to blame the prospects and say, well, there's just no good prospects out there. I'm going to look at the offer and the messaging of the offer. So very similar to sales recruiting, you have to really look at your offer in the recruiting marketplace. In other words, your career opportunity for that salesperson, you got to look at how good that is or how bad that is. And really, like, what all does that have to do with it? The reason we can attract such great people is because we have a great reputation. We have a great opportunity for people to grow and have personal growth. We have a great culture. We have a great community. We have a great brand. People really believe in the products. We can pay the most out of almost anybody. I mean, you can see, like, we just stack like every single little thing that the salesperson would be wanting to, that would be important for them in an opportunity or a role. We're doing all of that stuff, right? So that's what you really got to look at if you're just starting off, is like, well, I want to attract a good salesperson, but have I and my company, are we really the type of people that deserves a great salesperson? And when you flip it around like that, oh, I totally deserve a great salesperson. We have leads, but they really don't, So the first thing we want to look at is, how can we make the position a little bit sexier? And so we want to look at a few things. First of all, very, kind of lame advice, is boring, but what's your mission, vision, and values? I never realized this, but like, I have a buddy who's, he sold his agency for like $30 million, and he's like 21 too. It's just crazy. But he's like 21. He sold his agency for like $30 million, and now he's starting a Web3 company. And I won't get into his whole vision because I think he wants to keep it private. But he was explaining his vision to me, and it was just such a big vision of how he packages together. And the first thing I thought after he got done saying it is, I was like, dude, no wonder you've been able to recruit such great people. Because he was breaking down his team too, and his team was just like stacked. And like people who just, I was like, man, these people are insane. This kid's so young, but it's just the vision, right? And the vision attracts great people. So what you really got to look at first of all is like, what are you doing, and what's the vision behind it? I think of vision, mission, and values is in this way. The vision, imagine we're all getting on a boat, okay? Like one of the old boats with like the sails and like, the old days. We're all getting on a boat. The vision is the challenging destination we're headed towards.
Yep.
Right? It's got to excite people. The mission is why we're headed to that destination. It's the why behind where we're headed. And then the values is how we're going to interact with each other on the trip of going where we're going. It's the tolerated, acceptable standard of behavior. And when you think of it that way, mission, vision, and values in terms of the boat example, I really think it's like, it for me, that was the first time the whole mission, vision, and values thing was driven home for me, because for the longest time I used to hear people talk about that, and I was like, that's kind of like bullshit. It's like kind of corporate-y. And then I really got it. And very few people do that correctly. But if you could have an amazing vision, an amazing why behind the vision, which is your mission, and then amazing values and behavior in the company, and culture, the people you can attract is just ridiculous. Like, we have people all the time who want to accept lower pay to work for us. And it wasn't always like that. But now people see kind of, we have a big vision, we have a big mission, and we're nowhere like, imagine if you're Google, like, oh my God, like people just do anything to work for them. They'll just work for half the pay they could make for somewhere else just because it's Google. So that's another big thing. That you have something to add to that, or there's more beyond just mission, vision, and values?
Well, you and I are both, we both have strong backgrounds in marketing, right? So, when you're talking about this, we entered this phase of the conversation of like, okay, well, how do you attract great talent? How do you attract great salespeople? What's kind of the first step, right? Or if I've tried and failed in the past, and it all comes down to what's your offer? Like, not your offer to the market, what's your offer to the salespeople? Like, because everything's an offer. Right? Yeah. You need to recruit people, you need an offer, right? So how do you create a sexy offer to attract great people? And so as you started to talk about, like, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, okay, well, what if I'm, still early stage, right? And maybe I can't afford to pay the most, or I don't really know what makes me separate, what makes me stand out. It's almost like, mission, vision, and values is almost like your unique mechanism, right? Yeah. If you compare that to like an offer, it's like, what makes you different? Okay, well, here it is, right? Unique mechanism. Like if you're putting an offer out there in a crowded marketplace, how do you stand out? Unique mechanism. Well, maybe your unique mechanism is your purpose, is your company's vision, it's your company's mission, right? And that is another way to attract people into your offer today. I mean, is that Makes
No,
sense?
I totally agree. I mean, the easiest way to think about mission, vision, and values is it's basically the sales letter for your business you use for recruiting. It's the easiest way to think about it. And that's from Vivid Vision. I got that from Cameron Harold's book. But
Yep.
but yeah, I mean, so there's that. That's a big part. But even if you're just starting off, like if you just focus on basically on track earnings, which is lead flow, the comp structure, and the baseline closing rate. The baseline closing rate means like what were you closing as the founder before hiring salespeople? Like what is kind of the baseline? Or if you have existing salespeople, like what are they closing? If you have those three things, you can calculate basically how much they should make a year, if they're 100% commission. So if that's really intact, and the main thing is you could really show them that you have lead flow and the lead flow is good. Because salespeople have all been like the kind of salesperson, if you really want to get to the pain, it's like the business owner who overpromises the opportunity and like underdelivers. Like, oh, you're gonna have so many leads. The leads are so good, and the leads kind of stink. Or if there's no leads, you got to find your own leads. You're like, well, why don't I just start my business? So that's a big thing as well. But if you have that, and then you have great mission, vision, and values, even if you just focus on like so many business owners are so ignorant that they should even work on themselves. They just think people should be like, oh, I should just work for you. Like, please hire me. And it's like, dude, that's not how things work anymore, especially post-COVID. That's not how things work anymore at all. It's like people have more options than they've ever had. And like, if they're going to work for a company, there's got to be like real growth opportunity. There's got to be real, like, I don't want to say perks, like you got to give them a bunch of like benefits or something. But there's got to be like, they need to see it as the bridge between their current and desired situation as an employee. The same way your prospects see the offer as their bridge between current and desired situation. It's very, very similar. So, but if you just focus on those three things, lead flow, comp structure, good comp structure, and just so you can pay above average pay, especially in the early, just pay a little bit above average. You should be able to work that in your economics. And, baseline closing rate. And you just really focus on being a cool company to work for. You're a cool boss. You have a great mission, vision, and values. They can kind of see where you're going. They're excited by it. You should be able to recruit great people. Like even in the early days, I recruited some pretty good freaking people before I was even, some of my best people when I was sub 5 to 10 employees.
When you make that first hire, that first sales rep hire, salesperson hire, is there a strategy behind that role? Meaning like that's the first person that's really giving you your time back, right? And if you're talking vision and growth, strategically, do we want that first hire to be a potential, maybe a potential sales manager, or do we really want somebody to just slay it on the phone and then you can hire a sales manager later? Like what's the ideal flow?
For most people, I mean, look, if you could find a sales manager in your first go or somebody who can build into that, amazing. Not very likely. It's because remember, if you're a new entrepreneur doing this for the first time, you don't have the skill of sales management. So like, you're probably not even going to know, you're probably not going to hire the best salesperson to start off to begin with, because you don't even know what a good salesperson is. And then, again, like probably attracting somebody who's that high caliber, also a little bit tough. So here's what typically happens. You're the one on the phones, you're closing like 20, 30%. You kind of work it out. You're like, okay, I could really like on track earnings, lead flow, it's all there. Okay, great. I'm ready to hire a salesperson. What you want to do is always hire 2. Okay. Because remember, like the human brain can only really assess things in general through comparison, right? So we want to hire 2 because if they both stink, we know we stunk. If they both work, well, we know that's great. Okay, we got 2 great salespeople. If one works and one doesn't, you just probably got some, you hired one good person, you hired one bad person. But if they both stink, you can really look at like, well, how am I leading them? How am I coaching them? How did I onboard them? Does my lead flow stink? I mean, you can look at all these different things because you sort of isolated the variables in some ways. But if you hire one, you really don't know. Okay. So you always want to hire 2. Now, to rewind a few steps behind that, essentially what we want to do starting off is we want to look for 3 things. Okay. Specialized knowledge is number 1. Industry acumen is number 2. And buy-in is number 3. So specialized knowledge, Naval Ravikant says that specialized knowledge is only is knowledge and experience. Knowledge that only comes from the experience of actually doing it. It's knowledge that can't be learned in a textbook, in a college, in a class, in a YouTube video, in a course, or whatever. It can, by the nature of it being specialized, you can't learn it by going through information. You can only learn it through going through experience. So I look for that in every hire that I ever make. However, the easiest way to put that for a salesperson is like, do they have a proven track record? Right? Like Charlie Munger says, like the best predictor of future success is you don't look at what they're forecasting or what they're promising or what they're saying they can do. You just look at what they've already done. So that's the first thing we want to look for is like, what is their track record of success / experience? Okay. Do you need to have that 100% of the time? Not necessarily. We'll get into that in a second. The second thing you need is industry acumen. So every industry has a language, right? If you're in the car, if you're selling used cars, you're speaking a language. If you're selling women's health and fitness for women over 40 with a specific type of hormonal issue. I know that sounds specific, but I have a client who does that. That's a very specific language. Okay. If you're selling marketing consulting, right? If you're selling webinars, very specific language, right? There's a specific language every industry speaks. And essentially what you want is a salesperson who has enough experience in the industry to where they can speak the language, right? To where if you're on the phone with the salesperson, you're going to kind of think like the salesperson gets it, right? They're part of the tribe. Like they know what they're talking about. They're a person of value, right? This is what Jordan Belfort talks about with the 3 tells. I think he says like sharp as a tack, a leader in their industry, and enthusiastic or something. It kind of sounds corny. This is what he's actually, I think, meaning is it like somebody of value within the industry. Okay, that's why a lot of reasons founders sell so much better than the salespeople is because the founders have the expertise in the industry that gives them value, right, and the salespeople don't. So you want to try to find salespeople who can like be educated enough in the industry to provide some insights, and that really gives the prospect this feeling of like this is valuable and they get it. Okay. Yep. So the third thing is buy-in. That's buy-in to the mission, vision, and values, right? Like they got to be bought into where we're going, why we're going, where we're going, and the tolerated behavior on the way to where we're going. So we already covered that whole thing. Now, here's the thing. If you get somebody with all 3, you could very well have a superstar. But to be honest, you really only need always buy-in is non-negotiable. And then essentially you either need specialized knowledge or industry acumen. So in other words, if you get a really great salesperson who has a ton of experience, chances are they can learn the language and the specifics of the industry and figure it out. Right? Like if you got somebody from like software who was like the best software salesperson ever, and they won a competition of software sales and they were the best person at HubSpot, and they're coming and selling webinars, they're probably going to know how to sell. You're just going to have to kind of teach them like the industry. Does that make sense? Right. On the flip side, if you have, let's say, a copywriter who really gets webinars, maybe he was writing webinars for you, and he's like kind of had this epiphany. He's like, dude, I really want to be a salesperson because I want to be able to increase my income to like $25K a month. And I know this position offers that. Well, all you got to do, and he gets like what you're selling really to deep level. He has that expertise. So you just got to teach him the basics of selling. So you either want, what's perfect is that if they have everything, but generally that's very hard to find, especially in our industry, because a lot of these things are very specific or very new. You know what I mean? So ideally you could find all 3, but typically in our industry, which is like coaching, consulting, info, you usually get 2 out of the 3.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
I want to ask I want to ask a follow-up question to that. As we are searching for these rock stars, searching for these salespeople, right? We got the 3 pillars that we really want to focus on. Obviously, we want as many as possible. If you get all 3, it's a rock star. You want to shoot for around 2 out of the 3 and train the rest. But like, I've always struggled with, and this may be just me, but I have seen different models of salespeople, meaning like their roles in a company, and I've seen the traditional people where the traditional salespeople, which all they do is sell, and then they hand off to like an account manager. You enroll, and then you hand off to the account manager. Going through your process, right? When I worked with your team, Igor, I think was my account rep.
Right.
He was kind of with me throughout the entire journey, right? Do you find different models of how to incorporate sales reps into your business? Meaning, like, do you think it's most effective to have a sales rep the only thing they do is sell, or do they also sell and possibly fulfill and ascend? I don't know if I'm asking a clear question, but
No,
do
I
you
know
understand
exactly
where I'm
what you
coming
mean.
from?
Yeah, I
Okay,
know
all
exactly
right,
what you mean. So,
yeah,
so should your sales reps do the fulfillment as well? Look, generally, no. However, there is people who do that model and it does work. I had one agency client who scaled to like 2.5 million a month. I don't know if he sold his agency or not, but he was going to sell it for a lot, and that
was
was
that
his
the
model.
ad? Was that advisory?
I can't say who it is, but
Okay,
but long story short, I've seen that model work, but only a few times. Generally, you want your salespeople to focus on new business revenue and new business development. And then you
got it.
want your account managers to focus on results, fulfillment, retention, and ascension, right? So you want them kind of separated and siloed and there to be a good handoff. Doesn't always have to be that way. And I would say, like, for depending on the company, you could do it both ways. It's just that it's hard for somebody to like go out and hunt and kill and then also like tend to the village at the same time. Like
Right.
it's like two different things, right? So you need like farmers, tenders, and then you need like hunters, gatherers, right? It's like go out, bring the kill in, then you have somebody like prepare the kill. Not to, equate prospects to going out and killing animals, but this is what I was thinking about. So anyways, typically that does work the best. And so you kind of have three sales teams. You have the outbound team, which goes and sets appointments. Now that could be off marketing, that could be cold. A lot of times we do it off marketing. And then you have your kind of closing team or your inbound team. That's who closes the deal. Then your third sales team is the fulfillment team, which can operate in a lot of different ways. That could either be just the account managers, or like in another one of our companies, we have all the account managers, and then they set for a dedicated back end sales team who back end upgrades because there's so many. I mean, that's a full time job, and within itself, there's so many clients. So yeah, so typically that's what I find to be the best makeup. That's what most of I've seen people do as well. But both can work. So it just sort of depends.
Well, the only reason I brought it up is because I've seen it talked about more and more frequently. Not a ton, but enough to be like, oh, hey, there's a new way to do it, and I thought, who better to ask than the king of
Yeah.
sales teams. And so
Yeah.
I'll be honest, I haven't seen it very often. I've only heard it talked about, and so it's kind of like a new buzz. Like, oh, like what if your salesperson's also your customer service, just making the transition and handoff much more
Yeah.
seamless. So
Yeah,
it
the
probably
main
not.
thing the main thing to look at it though, because now that you're saying that I know a few other people who've made that change, you've got to first look at if they're actually good at running a sales team. Because a lot of people are doing that because they just don't know how to run a sales team, and they kind of threw their hands up in the air and they were like, you know what, I just rather like I can't get my sales team to think about business owners, or I can't get them to set the right expectations. So I'm just going to do it this way instead because they're more operator type mindsets. But if you really want to like push the sales team to the maximal amount of performance, it's not good to have them do both. Like they're not going to be able to tend and care and fulfill and retain and ascend people and go out and get new business. Like it's just two different mindsets. It's very, very difficult. So, but yeah, I mean, certain people will do that, but they do it because it's like, a lot of it's a lack in their ability to manage a sales team. So it kind of
Yep.
depends.
Yeah, I didn't mean to derail it, but it was just kind of like it's popped up a few times on my radar, so I wanted
Yeah.
to ask, and if anybody else was thinking it, I wanted to kind of just bring it up. But it totally makes sense. It's like they're completely different personality types, right? Obviously, anything could possibly work, but what's most effective, what's most efficient. So,
Yep.
all right. So I want to get back to all right, like now we talked about like your triad of ideal salespeople, right? Number one, so I got a couple follow-up questions. Number one, like, where is your favorite source to go get leads for salespeople, right? When you're out recruiting, right? Where's the honeypot, right? Are we doing, Indeed? Are we doing groups? Like if I'm out there, I want to go find my first closer. I won't even talk about setters yet, but like if I want to go find a closer, right? Because is that usually the first person people hire is a closer, or
typically, unless they're running kind of a funnel like the Facebook group funnel a lot of people run. That's one where I recommend doing setters first because like you kind of need it's based on setters. But to be honest, even at that, like the Facebook group funnel is not bad. Like we will recommend some clients do that if their lead flow's struggling a little bit. The holy grail is if they can get either some sort of low ticket thing going, which I would say that's number 2. I would say number 1 by far is a good VSL. Like that is like the best, but the problem is you got to be a good copywriter. So it's like a lot of people just aren't there yet in their journey. So it's kind of, but I do think by far I could have a whole conversation about that. But I do think that by far is the best model. It's just hard. So anyways, where to find a $1 million question? I thought for the longest time, I was like, man, there's this honeypot of salespeople I can just like find and like, oh my God. And it would be really great for my marketing if there was a honeypot that only I could access, and I could be like, well, I have access to this. The reality is, there isn't. There's a lot of different options. So here's the thing. The best place, if there is a honeypot, here's what it is good salespeople know other good salespeople. Okay? You just got to remember that phrase. So my entire company was built off the fact that I was consulting a bunch of sales teams and salespeople. And I would literally get asked every single day, where can I find good salespeople? Do you know where I can find good salespeople? And eventually I just was like, well, I might as well just start a company doing this because I almost didn't want to for the longest time, but I felt like the universe, not as woo as it sounds, I just feel like the universe or something was like telling me to do it because I was getting asked. I remember this 1 week right before COVID, I was getting asked every single day. Like it was in my inbox just daily. Where do you know a good salesperson? Do you know a good salesperson? Do you know a good salesperson? And so, and then I started like kind of like referring some of my friends. And then they would go on and then like they'd add a couple million a year to the business. I was like, well, that's kind of like not fair. I didn't even get paid for that. So eventually I decided to do that. And I really didn't want to because I'll be honest, the recruiting business stinks. Like it is done for you, complex, it's real hard. You got to deal with all this stuff. So like I see all these people copying me now and trying to get into it. And I'm like, well, first of all, you're not even a salesperson. Like you've never even built a sales team. Or you're never even a full-time salesperson. And then second of all, I don't think you realize like, that's not how you like get rich. Like that's hard. Like if you want to get rich, go learn crypto and teach a crypto offer like that. That'll make you money for sure. Like this is not sales recruiting, man. It's just because I have experience doing this, but that's neither here nor there. So good salespeople know other good salespeople. So if you're trying to find a good salesperson, the first thing you do is you find other good salespeople in your industry and you say, hey, I'll give you, I would go upwards of $5,000 if it was me. But if maybe, if your finances are tight to $2,500, be like, hey man, I'm looking for a salesperson, kind of like this, and this, here's the income potential. I'll pay $2,500 if I can, if you can refer me somebody. So that's the first thing I would say. I would find other good salespeople inside of my own industry. And I'd ask them if they know any other good people who'd be good for this particular type of role. And I'd give them a referral bonus. The reason I would look for people in my industry first is because if you ask salespeople in the industry, you're going to find all 3 people of the triad, right? Because they're going to be inside the industry that you're in, and good salespeople know other good salespeople, so they're going to refer you an actual salesperson.
Yep.
Then I would ask just good salespeople in general. Maybe they're outside the industry, but then you at least get 2 of the 3 out of the triad. So those are the 2 I would try first. The second one or the third one is I would kind of move this inside out approach. So I would ask for referrals from your clients. I'd ask referrals from your friends. I would ask referrals from all your peers in the industry. I'd ask referrals from your team members. Just try to give them $2,500 or $5,000 or whatever if they know anybody. If you just go, it's actually pretty surprising, but if you just go in your iMessage and your messenger inbox and you just just go down the last 200 messages and write a personalized message asking for a referral of any position you're looking for to every single one, dude, you will find people straight up. Like, I don't care what position it is. You'd be looking for a freaking CEO of your company. You're going to find somebody. It's just amazing how that works. And so you got to do that. You may find good people that way. You may not, but typically I would recommend doing that. Now, after that, The next thing is a little bit more difficult. So you got to reach out to current salespeople inside or outside of your industry and try to make them a better offer, right? So you're like poach them. Now that's very easy if you're in software, because there's so many, like you can use like
Yeah.
LinkedIn Sales Navigator to just like find them on LinkedIn and just message them. Our industry they don't go on LinkedIn and like put like account executive HubSpot. It's hard to find them on LinkedIn. They don't even have LinkedIn's. So you could do that. It's just a little bit difficult because you're going to be finding people in software. And then also the standard in our industry is more of 100% commission. All those software people are going to want a base. Telling you from experience.
Tuition.
They're going to want a base. Yep. And to be honest, a lot of people, there's this connotation that people think like, man, like if I can get a salesperson from HubSpot or a salesperson from Close.io or a salesperson, not Closers.io, that's my company, but it's Close.com now, the CRM. Where else? Like all these like different software companies, Pinterest and whatever. They're like, oh man, if I can find somebody who sold for that company, they're going to be so good. They have all this experience. Dude, you don't realize, man, like most of them are just taking orders. Like they're kids right out of college, taking orders. They don't know how to do discovery. They just like, they send some follow-up messages. So they're not that good. I'm not saying they couldn't be good, but they're not that good. Door-to-door companies, very good. So like Southwestern, Cutco, those ones are good. But again, those ones are a little bit tough to find. And a lot of them are bad. So like just because they sold door-to-door doesn't mean they're good. But the thing is, if you can find somebody who was a top door-to-door sales rep and give them that referral bonus, then you could be onto a gold mine. So after that, the final thing and the last source will be job boards. Job boards do work. The problem is that it's an immense, I know this because we use it for our recruiting, but the thing is that it's an immense amount of volume to get, like, it's like hundreds of apps to maybe get like one good person. So like, it's hard for the average entrepreneur to do it. It's much, for our company, it's easy because we have a whole team that sifts through all this stuff and all these systems. But, I don't typically recommend that. I would go through a recruiter like us before you would probably try to do a job board. You're probably not going to find anybody that great. It's just so much volume to maybe find one good person, which is tough.
Well, it's a hiring funnel at that point. Like when you get volume, like you got to go through filtering. And I mean, I've done hiring agencies in the past, recruiting agencies in the past, and they just run a funnel, which is fine. Like that's what's needed when you get the volume, right? I want to ask you a question about poaching, right? So this is my opinion. I've never poached anyone. I've been poached, but I've never poached anyone. If I were to, try to poach someone, my opinion, and this is my opinion, I don't know if this is true or false, this is what I'm asking you about, is that like, I would be attracting a job hopper, right? Not anyone who's committed, because if they're willing to just kind of, jump ship, obviously their situation might not be great. But, my biggest fear at this point, like if I'm trying to build a long-term company, established mission, vision, values, I want people who are going to stick around, right?
Yeah.
If I'm poaching somebody, I don't know, in the back of my mind, I'm wondering like, okay, like, my buddy.
I get what you're saying. So you got to look at the reason why they're leaving. If they're leaving because of the pay, then what you're saying is probably true. If they're leaving because you have a better mission, vision, and values and they're more bought in, then what you're saying is not true. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah. So it depends on why they're leaving. Now, obviously, if it's the pay and the mission, vision, and values, then, there you go. But you got to make sure, like, you definitely don't want like the headhunter, not the headhunter. What am I saying? The hired gun. That's what I want.
Oh, yeah.
Hired gun salesperson who's just like going to the best role. But typically, like in our process, that person wouldn't even make it past like a culture interview. Like we just would never hire a person like that to begin with. We want to make sure they're really bought into like what we're doing.
Cool. Got it. So, okay. So looking in terms of like your lead source, you obviously start internal first. You look at referrals, you look at your own network and asking if they know anyone, right? Especially within the industry, because number one clicks off that triad, right? Of like, they know the language or they're very close to knowing the language. They don't need a long on-ramp to be brought up to speed with what you're selling, which is, man, that is so true. By the way, after working with like quite a few sales reps, like The number one thing that pains me the most with working with sales reps over like the same sales rep over a length of time is that they keep coming to me with like the same question. Hey, like, what's, why am I,
Yeah.
what's the reason behind this? Like, dude, I've like, this is basic, like not basic stuff, but like, God,
Yeah.
like, but people gotta be trained up. But,
Yep.
anyway, so internal first, then you go, what goes internal, and then what was number two again? Number two source.
Well, yeah. I mean, the first thing you want to do is good salespeople know other good salespeople. Then you want to
That's right.
kind of go
Referral.
internal to external, then to outbound, and then to job boards. And that's it. That's obviously if you're not gonna hire my company or a recruiter. I'm trying to give people like some steps if they want to DIY.
Yeah. All right. So then, we get them in the interview process, we do some filtering. Like, what are some like, give me like the top one or two questions that are like great indicators of like, hey, we've got a serious candidate here. Like, what are
Yeah.
your top one or two favorite questions to ask to help weed out a lot of the tire kickers from
Well,
the
let me give
rock
you my
stars?
interview. Let me give you my interview process. So
All right.
we do an introduction. That's basically a little tiny bit of rapport. And then I just want to float out like, okay, so I'll say like, what about wherever they reached out, stuck out to you that wanted you to reach out about this position? Like what interested you about it? Interested you the most about it. And then, has anything stuck about our company specifically? Just like basic stuff like that, just to kind of see like, why are they here? Essentially. Same thing you would on a sales call for the most part. And then I also want to float out in the beginning a few qualifiers like, do you know it's 100% commission? Do you know it's 100% remote? Do you know it's 100% full time? Just to like make sure like I'm not going to waste my time.
Right.
And so then after that, we go into work history. So I want to map out their last three positions and basically what they did, what they accomplished, what their KPIs were, what the performance was, and then most importantly, why they like the story of like why they left and how they kind of went from one to the other to one to the other, one to the other for the most part, right? So I want to see a upward spiral momentum to release to where it's lateral moves or upward moves, not downward moves. And I want to see what the real reason is behind essentially like why they left, and a way you can do that is you're like, okay, like, well, I'm just curious, like, so why did you transition from X to Y company? And then they say whatever the reason is, and you can say, well, I guess that makes sense. Is there any other reason you wanted to leave though? And then they'll tell you like the real reason. So there's two reasons for anybody to do anything. There's like the reason that sounds good, and then there's the real reason, right? So I could go into the whole thing about that, but like you'll ask that second question and somebody would be like, well, yeah, I just like hated my boss. Like they'll just tell you like the real thing. Cause like they almost they think that like, oh, he can tell. Does that make sense? There's other ways you could do that too, but that's a cool little like thing you can do on the interview. So I like that question. Then after work history, I go into, I believe it's CBBI questions. Okay, if not, it's the one after this. But anyways, CBBI questions. So essentially, most people on any interview, they ask what's called situational based questions. So they're like, hey, so if like you came in and this scenario happened, what would you do? Right? If you came in, like what exactly, kind of how would you set this up in the next 90 days? They ask situational questions, which to be honest, aren't necessarily that bad. But the problem is with situational questions is it's assuming what they say they're going to do, they're actually going to do. Because it's one thing to like know, it's one thing to say you're going to do all these things, but like, can you actually do it? Have you actually done it? Do you have experience doing that? And is that what you're actually going to do? And again, as Charlie Munger says, like, you don't want to look at what somebody's forecasting or saying they're going to do or what they're projecting. You want to look at what they've actually already done. So CBBI questions assess competencies, not by asking what they're going to do, but by asking what they've already done. So they all basically start with the phrase, tell me a specific time when. So you say something along the lines of like, so I would say like, Joel, was there a time at X, Y, and Z company when your lead flow like really wasn't up to par? And you're like, oh yeah, it's like every other month, blah, 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 blah. Gotcha. Like what was the worst time specifically? Okay, like last May, this happened with lead flow. I felt like every person I was talking to was blank, blank, blank. Gotcha. So tell me specifically, like during that time, what specific actions did you take to hit your KPIs despite lead flow not being up to par. So you see how I set you up for that question?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's like another one would be like, tell me about 2 specific times where you made an extreme proactive sales effort to push a deal across the line. Okay. So you see how I'm asking for a story or a specific instance that demonstrates a competency.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
So for instance, what a lot of people will do when you ask this is they'll say, well, generally when I'm trying to get a deal across the line, what I'll do is blank. You need to reel it back in and see if they actually tell you a story.
Right.
Does that make sense?
So yes. So what you're saying is like you don't want them to speak and explain in terms of theories. You want them to speak in terms of experience and actual
what they've actually done. Yeah.
What they've actually done.
And you could use this for anything, right? You could hire a marketing director. I mean, anybody, copywriting. I mean, it's like, it's easy for positions like graphic design where you can just look at literally what they've actually done. But for sales, you got to kind of use like the specifics of the story, you know? So then I look at that. The next thing I look at is inputs. So good inputs equal good outputs. So for instance, like a lot of people think Einstein was a genius, but Einstein was heavily influenced by Newton. And I think like Newton was heavily influenced by Galileo. Like all these like philosophers, they're like interconnected. They were like highly influenced by each other. It's like a web. And if you look at like all the best jujitsu instructors in the world, I do jujitsu. It's like they're all like they came from like 2 or 3 different guys, or maybe like 1 different guy, and they're all like it's crazy how like interconnected they are, and how like this really famous gym owner, black belt guy who has a dojo used to be like this guy's apprentice, and and they both used to be this guy's apprentice. It's a web. Yep. All things are like that, right? So you want to assess their inputs because inputs equal outputs. This is for every position as well. So we'll just ask questions like, what's your sales philosophy? What's influenced your sales style the most? Who's been your number 1 sales mentor? What sales books have you read? We'll dig into the sales books. I mean, because anybody who's like reading a ton of sales books, they've taken sales courses, maybe they had a really influential sales manager, they'll typically always be really good. So that's a really good question as well. Then we'll go into
because they're growth minded. Like that's an indicator, in my opinion, of like, okay, you know, somebody who's interested in growth because they're pursuing personal development, their own personal skill set growth.
100%. Well, yeah, I mean, but also good inputs equal good outputs. So it's not just a habit and they're demonstrating that, oh, okay, they're working on themselves. True. But it's also like if this person's read 20 sales books, like they fed their brain and their consciousness good information, and there's likely good output to come out of that. Does it make sense? So we have that. Then we assess attitude. Attitude basically assesses internal versus external locus of control. So do they like, when they run up to obstacles, do they feel like they have agency, or do they feel like they're a victim of their circumstances? Okay. That one's pretty easy. Then what we do is we assess career fit. So that's basically, long story short, these questions aren't that ninja. It's just, I ask a few questions to see like, is this role align with your current to desired situation? You know, try to see what their vision is and see like, have they thought through how this role gets them to this vision? Mm-hmm. So really that's the interview process. Now, if you do it the way I just told you, which I'd have to kind of teach a little bit more of the questions. It's pretty intense. Like I've had people be like, I've never been interviewed like this in my entire life. And sometimes like you might chase away some good people because you just grill them so bad. So maybe like tame it down a little bit, because somebody might not nail the CBBI questions, but they're just really hungry. They might not have as much experience, but they've read a bunch of books. You know, like some of our best salespeople had never even sold high ticket before. Some of them had no experience in the industry. They had light solar sales experience, and like that wasn't even that great. Now they're our best person. So you kind of got to look at things holistically. Because I think people will constrain their view of a good person a little bit too much. But yeah, generally those are the questions I ask. And that's really my interview process for every single position. It's really, really good.
Yeah. I mean, it's, you know, as someone who doesn't run we have 10 people on our team, right? And almost everybody that's on my team, we brought from internal, meaning they're customers of mine, clients of mine. They just liked me and they wanted to join the team. But I've gone through enough interviews to realize, like, you know, when I was hiring sales reps back in the day, I treated them like I didn't treat them like garbage, but like I treated the interview like garbage. I'm like, oh, they're just, they're 100% commission only. So like, I don't know, like I came from 100% commission. Like that was my career before I even jumped into entrepreneurship. And it's like, oh, I only sold them on the vision of they can make, their unlimited income. Right. And it's like, those are the worst people that ever worked for me because they weren't sold on anything else. They weren't bought into anything else. And, but that's just inexperience from running a business. That's inexperience from running a team. But you get a couple of key questions dialed in. Number one, it makes you look like you're serious, makes it look like you got your shit together, which solidifies your mission, vision, and values. Number two, it's qualifying, and you get to really see the types of answers that come out. And like, obviously, the more that you do, the more you start to get feedback of like, oh, okay, like this is a bullshitter. This person actually seemed like they were putting in some effort behind the answer, and there's a lot to learn from that. But it's super interesting, man. It's super interesting. As you start to think bigger and you start to step into that leadership role, the game changes, and it's fun. Like it is really fun to kind of think about that. But you as the leader has to change. You have to change too. Like it's
well, yeah, I mean, it all comes down to the leader, man, and the leaders eventually. It truly is. And I think that's the biggest reason people get stuck is they instead of realizing that they're bumping up against a ceiling of growth as a leader, they think it's like their offer or their marketing or it's usually what they think it is. It's like one of those two. Maybe it's their sales team, but it's like one of these tactical things opposed to like this complex issue, which is how you're showing up as a leader, right? Like we tend to generalize, delete, and distort information into like these certain biases and categorize them. It's just so easy for you to look at like maybe somebody looks at you, man, and they're like, man, Joel's a really accomplished copywriter and he has a great business. And they're like, well, it's just because like Russell Brunson gave him a testimonial. It's like they just they like cling on to this little thing because it's a simple explanation for a very highly complex matter. That's where all conspiracy theories come from. And I'm not saying I know where COVID came from or whatever, but people are like, oh, it was China. I don't know if it was China or not. I'm just saying like, I'm sure it's a very complex answer to that question, but they're like, boom, that's what it is. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I have literally no idea. I don't educate myself about that as much, but, people tend to do that. And it's just very hard to look inward and be like, oh, it's me. It's very easy to be like, well, I'm just going to start a new offer. There's a crypto guy making money. I'm going to do crypto. It's like, no, it's you. And the big thing about this, I always tell people is like, man, if Alex Hormozy could sell Gym Launch for however much he sold it for, like 67 million, and that was like 2/3 of a share, not even the entire company, and he was selling to like the brokest market, who, really broke market. I never had a successful client one time who sold the gyms. That's a really tough market. Sold to the worst market, had no money. I don't know. I can list a bunch of other challenges too. It's not any industry that anybody want to go in, but he basically did more revenue than anybody else in the industry. Like, what other proof do you need that like it's not all about like your offer? Sure, if you want to be a billionaire, okay, maybe don't start a consulting business. You need to go into private equity or have a hedge fund or a tech company or something that you can exit for a really, really high multiple. But dude, like most people can make multiple 8 figures, generational amounts of wealth just by becoming really good at giving value to the marketplace and also really working on themselves as managers, leaders, great at getting a great mission, vision, values, a lot of unsexy stuff that people don't want to really talk about. That's fine. They're just not going to do as good. They're not going to be ever competition. The people who are competitive at the 8-figure level, multiple 8-figure level, I know the majority of them. And they're all pretty good leaders. They all run a great team. They all have a great product. It's like all these kind of boring things.
Yeah. So I want to kind of summarize a lot of this stuff because we talked about a lot. And it's super inspirational, man, because really what it does is I think it challenges the people who, I don't want to classify them as playing small, but they're struggling to get at like phase 1 of their business, right? Phase 1 is like, okay, like you have product to market fit, or at least you have got some early indicators that like, okay, you got lead flow, right? But you're struggling to get to the next stage, which is now, okay, delegating your sales so you can focus on, optimizing your product, or you can focus on customer service, or you can focus on any number of other things, right? That have to go on in the business. But I think what it really does, and this was one of the things that I learned from you, Cole, when we were talking back in the day, is it challenges you as an entrepreneur to think bigger, and not necessarily just think bigger in terms of like numbers, but like challenge your personal growth and your business development as a leader, because the rules of the game are written. I mean, anyone can go find them. Like, you know what you have to do to get to a certain level, and if you're not doing it, like, it's all internal, man. I mean, um it's all your own. It's your responsibility, and people can help, but like it comes from within. Like, if you have salespeople that leave, well, number one, you're probably not vetting properly. Number two, you're probably getting from shitty sources. Or number three, you don't have the lead flow. Or number four, like, they're not bought into your mission, your core mission and your values of your company, right? So we had a conversation a while back, and I remember it. But you challenged me. You're like, yeah, man, it's on you. It's on you to change, and it's on you to develop. And I think that's really, really important. But to come back to my original point of like summarizing this whole conversation, by finding a great salesperson, right? The best thing that I heard, number one, is hire two at a time, because you can't go wrong hiring two at a time. You find two rock stars, like, you're going to take off like a freaking rocket ship, right?
Yep.
You find one bad one good one, whatever, you still come out on top, right? You find two bad ones, well, it's on you. Okay, that's an indicator that it's on you. Like, you didn't vet them properly. There you go. There's a feedback loop. There is an internal indicator. Like, all right, great. Now I know I need to change something in my hiring process, right? So that was like the one biggest takeaway. We talked about, where to find your lead sources. Obviously, referrals from other sales reps, your best lead source, and pay for it, right? It's all, it's almost like joining masterminds, like pay to get access, right? Pay another sales rep for a referral, because like that's the shortest path to success, right?
Yep.
So finding a referral source, then going to your internal network and asking them, and then finally doing outbound and doing your job boards, which probably most people, if they're hiring their first sales rep, they probably don't need to do that. They can probably find one from their internal network if they look deep enough.
Yep.
And then we talked about some interview questions. So was there anything that we missed that like you really wanted to cover in terms of like, hey, listen, if you want to get to that next stage, like a rock star sales rep is what you need? Was there anything you really wanted to cover that you felt like you missed?
No, I mean, I feel like we got most of it, at least what we can get in this time frame. Obviously, to remind people, they really got to build the skill, right? So they got to know how to ramp a sales rep, how to manage a sales rep, and that's really what my company does. Is not only does all the recruiting for them, and leverages most of our best recruits come from leveraging the salespeople in our network to find other good salespeople. Like, there's a big misconception that all of our salespeople come from our certification program. And it's not true. More than half come from just pure headhunting or working referrals out of our own network. And really, mostly the entry-level ones come out of the certification program, which is basically a program, for people who don't know, that where people pay for us to train them on selling high ticket specifically. And usually they start off as a setter. And then that way they're kind of plugged in. They've already been through the training. They've been through a series of role plays and other activities. They need to even qualify to get on an interview. And just because they even go through it doesn't necessarily mean they're good enough for us to pair them with clients. But a lot of our competitors like to be like, well, that's all you're only pairing up people with a certification. It's like that's one of literally 10 avenues that we use to get sales reps. But the best one is using our own. We've placed well over 1,000 reps, maybe a couple thousand. And the best one is just asking for referrals of the reps we placed, because they know all the good people, and then we just pay them. So I don't know where I was going with that, but yes. So not only, do we do that, but also like what we help entrepreneurs do is really build that skill. And so the last thing I was going to tack onto what you were saying is don't forget that you got to really step into being a sales manager. And most people, they don't want to do that. They want a pendulum swing. And it's like, okay, great, you're taking the calls now. Hopefully you're good. I'm going to go like work on some other stuff and check on you like next month. You can't do that. You got to really step in and lead that person and really give them your energy. Your sales team, it takes energy in to get energy out. So that's the last thing I would say is
Well,
just to
well,
just not forget that you're building a skill.
yeah. So it's really important. So I actually do want to focus on that for just a minute before we wrap up, right? Because that is a big misconception, and I know this from personal experience. You think you hire a sales rep and boom, you're done. You think it's just completely delegated, and that is a big mistake. Like you're also just leaving your entire business to that person, right? And I think that's probably why you can't just hand it off because they're responsible for for the lifeblood of
Yeah.
your business. So like, you know, what is a simple cadence? What would you recommend is the cadence between that connection between you, the business leader, and the sales manager, and your first one or two sales reps? Like, how would you
Yeah.
recommend manage them? Because salespeople probably also don't like to be micromanaged, right? I mean, aren't
Yeah.
they more independent?
Believe me, most entrepreneurs aren't going to micromanage. I mean, it's
Okay.
1% will. There is some that are bad, but generally it's the opposite issue. They don't do anything. So, typically, one-on-one per sales rep per week. So that's a 30-minute one-on-one. You should really have it with all your direct reports. One-on-one per week. Sometimes as the founder, you get a little bit stretched. You get too many direct reports. So you can move to bi-weekly, but one-on-one per week per rep. So there's that. There's a daily team meeting. Then there's also an end of day report where they summarize every consult, what was great, what happened, what were the next steps, what were the problems, et cetera, what were the results. They summarize all of that, and then they rate themselves on a scale of 1 to 10 on a bunch of stuff, and then they put overall how are they doing. So end of day report, morning meeting every single day, one-on-one a week per sales rep, and then also I would do 3 to 5 call reviews per sales rep per week. Now, that last one, the call reviews, if you're a founder and you got a bunch of stuff going on, might be a little bit tough. So maybe you kind of skimp on that a tiny bit. But everything else, 100% they should do. Got to do a daily meeting, got to do the one-on-ones, got to do the end-of-day reports. So if we can get everybody to do all of those things, then it's usually pretty good. Now, the problem ends up being they kind of play the notes, but not the music. So it's like, okay, they're doing all of those things, but like the meetings aren't very good. So, you got to make sure they're running meetings good, which we could have a whole nother podcast about how to run the meeting. Because I would say the meeting is the most important part of the success of your sales team. The meeting is the centerpiece of the team. And so you really need to, I'll just drive that home. You would agree that sales culture is important, right?
100%.
Right? Well, where does culture take place in a remote company? It can
Zoom.
only take place, well, yeah, when 2 or more people of a company at one time are together. Right? Like that's the only time culture can take place is when 2 or more people of a company are together in the same place at the same time. Well, for the sales team, when is that? When's the only time that happens? The sales meeting. So the quality of your sales meeting is the quality of your sales culture. And if sales culture is maybe the most important thing, probably the most important thing of your entire sales team, well, the quality of the meeting dictates the quality of your sales team. So you have to run a great meeting. And like my reps will all tell you the meeting is their favorite part, which is pretty crazy. It's a meeting. Like I never thought that would actually happen is like the meeting is the favorite part. Most people are like, oh, I hate meetings. Can I take a call instead of this meeting? But that's because they get value, because the meeting's fun, because they get held accountable, because, it's all these basic things, but you have to have a great meeting. It's the centerpiece of the team.
Well, let me ask you this, right? So we started off this call by talking about like you had a leg up when you started your business because you worked as a sales, you worked on as a professional sales rep or sales professional for 5 years before. Before you jumped in, right? Now, you just mentioned your sales, your daily meetings, the most important part of your company, of your culture, of your sales teams, right? Did you learn that? Did you know that going into building your business? Is that one of the big things that you knew going into launching your own company that I needed to have this stuff in place in order for us to hit rocket ship growth like I'm expecting?
Yeah.
Or is that something you learned afterwards?
I'll tell you the big thing. So here's the thing. I had this huge advantage, not only of consulting all these different sales teams, but I was a full-time employee for 3 different companies in the high ticket space. And I kind of went from like the first company, really toxic. Second company, not necessarily toxic, but there's just like no leadership. It was just kind of like I just took calls and closed at 40%. Nobody talked to me or bothered me at all, which was kind of interesting. It was better than the first company, but it was like not good. And then the third company I worked for, which you know of, there was a lot of things. Like I would say 85 to 90% of what that company did in terms of management team and culture was really good. I thought I learned a ton in terms of how to run a big company, and I was with them from about three to 400 grand a month to $1.5 million a month. So I got there, and then I wasn't the sole reason we exploded or anything, but like I was there, then we exploded. So like I got to like ride this roller coaster, which was pretty cool. I learned so much in terms of how a team actually is supposed to operate during that time. But even more importantly, what I learned, and this is what if you read Robert Greene's Mastery, he talks about apprenticeship, and anybody who's a master in anything goes through this important time of apprenticeship. And one of the key things about your apprenticeship is you learn things from who you're apprenticing from that you really like, but you also learn about the things you don't agree with or the things you want to do different. And so I kind of took the best parts of what I learned there and combined it with things that I thought should be different or things that I wanted to do in my style, And that is what helped me tremendously right from the beginning. And I still have a lot of the same philosophy as I had when I left, because I kind of like, I knew a lot of these things that were right. And then I was like, every employee from any company, this is not like a knock on the company, any employee from any company, I'm sure people from my company are like, yeah, like there's 95% of what Cole does. It's really good. Here's like 5% I would do different. It's very normal. So I'm not saying they're a bad company or anything. I'm just saying like, this is normal stuff. So I kind of that's how I got kind of my spin on how to do culture and how to do teams and how to do all this stuff. And I think that's worked out really well for me. And it gave me a huge advantage, because the thing is, most internet marketers or coaches or whatever, they're an entrepreneur because like they don't like being an employee. I was kind of the opposite. I was an employee. I really didn't think I was going to start a business. And then I just kind of fell into it, and I had all this experience of being an employee for some good companies and some bad companies too. And it really helped me just know how to run a company. Go figure, because you're a part of one. It's kind of common sense, but most people in our industry don't they haven't worked for a big like a company like mine. Anybody who works for my company who goes off and starts their own thing, they have a huge advantage because they can see how we do it. So that's a big thing people don't think about. I think apprenticeship is huge when you're just starting off, and I'd recommend a lot of people who are really struggling, get a job for like 2 years, selling or copywriting or whatever, but like get inside of a rocket ship company, because I mean, you're going to punt your income maybe for a couple of years, but I mean, I don't know, depending on your position, you could still make a lot, but maybe you won't make as much as you could have made, but man, your growth will far exceed what you would have done by yourself. And then when you go back out by yourself, the income will catch up to the growth. Yeah. And that's how I left, and then it was like, boom, 100K a month. Like, I mean, it was like overnight, and I just kind of knew these things. So,
it's really, really important, that lesson or that example you just shared, because like anyone who, if you go from being employee to entrepreneur, you even just going from employee to employee, like from company to company, like you see, okay, I really like this about this company, I didn't like that, and so this is what I'm looking for next, right? It's like you are trying to reshape your ideal world, and as an entrepreneur, you get to build the ideal world. So you're in a different situation where what you liked, and 2 examples of what you really didn't like. So you got to really take blueprints. They're handed to you, not handed to you, but like you had them sketched out, and you knew, okay, great, like this is what it's going to take. And so it's invaluable, man. It really is. And anyone who's listening right now, to go from 0 to, I'm just going to reiterate, go from 0 to 30 million. Like, there's a blueprint, there's a plan that you followed, you executed it extremely well, right? Because then there's a lot of people who can take that same plan and they just fail in the execution. But culture is everything, right? Culture is everything. Your leadership ability is probably next. Actually, I don't even know if this is the right priority, but culture, leadership, and really just execution of the core fundamentals is what's going to get you get you head and shoulders above the rest. And oh yeah, by the way, like, sales reps are really important, but like you're finding the best sales reps really comes from everything we just talked about. So,
Yeah. Dude,
that was
I
great,
appreciate it,
man.
man.
So Cole, obviously this is what you do for your clients. Like, where can people reach out to you? Where can they connect with you?
Yep. If people want sales reps and are recruiting or just consulting on sales team stuff or consulting in general on scaling to, $1 million a month, $2 million a month plus, they can just go to closers.io. That'd be the easiest thing. Closers.io, not close.io.
Closers.io. Sweet. All right. Well, we'll make sure we link that down below. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a client of Cole's. He's got my full stamp of approval, and I know probably 80% of my friends and colleagues have all gone through your training or have worked with you personally or worked with your company. You don't get to $30 million a year selling a crappy product. So just understand this is what true success looks like when you have clients referring over and over, and you've got stability in your market, and you've got people who are referring all over the place. So, Cole, it was a blast, man. Appreciate you jumping on. And if anyone else is looking to hire sales reps or scale their company to the levels in which Cole can help you, reach out to him. And we'll see you
Thanks,
on the
man.
next episode.
Awesome. Thanks, brother.
All right.